The gunshot that rang out across the dusty main street of Carson City, Nevada, on that scorching August afternoon in 1878 was meant for Colt Rawlins, but the woman who threw herself in front of him took the bullet instead. Colt had been minding his own business, leading his chestnut mare toward the saloon after 3 weeks of driving cattle from the northern ranches down to the railhead. His muscles ached, his throat felt like sandpaper, and all he wanted was a cold beer and a hot meal before finding a bed for the night. The last thing he expected was to hear his name shouted across the street, followed by the crack of a pistol. His hand had barely touched his holster when a blur of blue fabric and dark hair collided with his chest, sending them both crashing into the wooden planks of the boardwalk. The woman landed on top of him, her weight surprisingly solid despite her slender frame. Blood bloomed across her left shoulder, staining the cornflower blue dress she wore. Her face contorted in pain, but her eyes remained fierce as they locked onto his. They were the color of burnt honey, flecked with gold, and filled with a determination that caught him more off guard than the gunshot itself. "Stay down," she hissed through gritted teeth, her voice carrying a sharp Eastern accent that marked her as clearly out of place in this rough Nevada town. Colt's instincts kicked in. He rolled them both behind a water trough as another shot splintered the post where his head had been seconds before. With one arm, he held the wounded woman against the trough while his other hand finally freed his Colt revolver. He spotted the shooter across the street, a man he recognized as Jake Brennan, a ranch hand he had fired 6 months ago for stealing from the supply wagon. "You ruined me, Rawlins," Jake shouted, his face twisted with rage and whiskey courage. "No one will hire me after what you said." "That is because you are a thief," Colt shouted back, keeping his body positioned to shield the woman. He could feel her blood soaking through his shirt where she pressed against him. "Put the gun down, Jake. You're only making this worse." Jake fired again, but his hand was shaking too badly for accuracy. The bullet went wide, shattering a window behind them. The sound brought the sheriff running from his office 3 doors down, his own weapon drawn. "Drop it, Brennan," Sheriff Morrison commanded, his weathered face set in hard lines. For a moment, Jake seemed to consider his options, then his shoulders sagged and the gun clattered to the dirt. 2 deputies moved in quickly to restrain him, and the street began to fill with curious onlookers who had taken cover during the shooting. Colt turned his attention back to the woman in his arms. Her face had gone pale, and she was starting to tremble. "What in the hell were you thinking?" he demanded, his voice rougher than he intended. The shock of what had just happened was beginning to set in. This complete stranger had taken a bullet meant for him. "I was thinking that I did not want to watch someone die today," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious pain. "Though I confess I did not fully consider the consequences before I moved." "Doc Henderson," Colt shouted toward the crowd. "Someone get Doc Henderson." "I am already here," came a calm voice. An older man with wire-rimmed spectacles pushed through the gathering crowd, his black medical bag already in hand. "Let me see her." Colt carefully helped the woman into a sitting position against the trough. Dr. Henderson knelt beside her and began examining the wound with practiced efficiency. His fingers were gentle as he moved aside the torn fabric of her dress. "Bullet went clean through," he announced after a moment. "You are very fortunate, young lady. Missed anything vital. But we need to get you to my office and clean this properly before infection sets in." "I can walk," the woman said, trying to stand. Her legs buckled immediately and Colt caught her before she could fall. "No, you cannot," he said firmly. Without asking permission, he scooped her up into his arms. She weighed less than he expected, and he could feel how delicate her bones were beneath the layers of her dress. "Direct me, Doc." As they moved through the crowd toward the doctor's office, Colt became aware of the whispers following them. He caught fragments of conversation, enough to understand that people knew who this woman was, and they were surprised to see her involved in such violence. A well-dressed woman standing outside the general store looked particularly scandalized. "That is the school teacher," she whispered loudly to her companion, "Miss Fiona Zimmerman. She only arrived 2 months ago from Philadelphia. What was she thinking?" Fiona. So that was her name? Colt looked down at her face as he carried her. Her jaw was clenched against the pain, but she held her head high, refusing to show weakness before the gathered townspeople. There was something admirable in that stubbornness, even if her actions had been foolish. Doc Henderson's office was a neat, whitewashed building near the edge of town. The interior smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. Colt laid Fiona carefully on the examination table, and the doctor immediately set to work gathering supplies. "You should go," Fiona said to Colt, her voice tight with pain. "I am certain you have better things to do than stand around watching me be stitched up." "I am staying," Colt replied, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "You took a bullet meant for me. The least I can do is make sure you pull through." Doc Henderson glanced between them with interest but said nothing as he began cleaning the wound. Fiona gasped when the antiseptic touched her torn flesh, her hand instinctively reaching out and grasping Colt's forearm. Her fingers dug into his skin with surprising strength. "Talk to me," she said through gritted teeth. "Tell me something. Anything to distract me from this." Colt found himself at a loss. He was not a man accustomed to idle conversation, especially with refined Eastern women who smelled like lavender despite having just been shot. But her honey-colored eyes were fixed on his face with an intensity that demanded he try. "My name is Colt Rawlins," he began awkwardly. "I run a cattle operation about 15 miles north of here. Been doing it for 7 years now, since I was 21. Built it up from nothing after my father died and left me enough money to buy my first head of cattle." "That must have been difficult," Fiona said, her breathing shallow. "Building something from nothing in this harsh land." "It was," Colt admitted. "Still is most days. The land does not give up anything easily. You have to fight for every inch, every head of cattle, every drop of water, but there is something honest about that fight. You know exactly where you stand." Doc Henderson was threading a needle now, preparing to close the wound. Colt instinctively moved closer, offering his hand. Fiona took it without hesitation, lacing her fingers through his. "Tell me why you came here," Colt said quickly, trying to keep her focused on something other than the needle piercing her skin. "To Carson City. You are clearly from somewhere very different." Fiona's breath hitched as the first stitch went in, but she forced herself to speak. "I came because I wanted to make a difference. Philadelphia is full of schools and teachers, but here, in these western towns, there are children who have never had access to a proper education. The territorial government approved funding for a school, and I applied for the position." "That is a noble reason," Colt said, "but Carson City must be quite a shock after Philadelphia." A slight smile touched her lips, despite the pain. "You have no idea. The dust alone is enough to drive a person mad. And the heat. Good Lord, the heat. I thought I would melt into a puddle my first week here." "But you stayed." "But I stayed," she agreed, "because the children deserve someone who will stay. Too many people come west looking for something, and when they do not find it immediately, they leave. These communities need people who will commit to them, who will stay through the difficult times." Doc Henderson finished the last stitch and began bandaging the wound with clean white cloth. "You're going to need to rest for at least a week," he said firmly. "No teaching, no lifting anything heavy, no strenuous activity of any kind. The wound needs time to heal properly." "A week?" Fiona protested. "But the children—" "Will survive without lessons for a week," the doctor interrupted. "Better that than you develop an infection and die, leaving them without a teacher permanently." Fiona looked like she wanted to argue further, but the exhaustion was catching up with her. Colt could see it in the way her eyelids were drooping, the way her body was starting to sag against the table. "Where are you staying?" Colt asked. "You will need someone to look after you for the next few days." "I have a room at the boarding house," Fiona said. "Mrs. Patterson, the proprietress, is very kind. I'm sure she will help me." Colt frowned. He knew Martha Patterson, and while she was indeed kind, she was also 73 years old with arthritis in both hands. She would not be much help to someone recovering from a gunshot wound. "I will make sure she has what she needs," Colt found himself saying to the doctor, "and I will pay for the medical care. It is my debt to settle." "That is not necessary," Fiona protested weakly. "I made the choice to intervene." "And I'm making the choice to help you now," Colt replied in a tone that left no room for argument. "Doc, what does she need?" Doc Henderson listed off instructions about changing bandages, watching for signs of infection, keeping the wound clean and dry. Colt committed each detail to memory. When the doctor was satisfied that Fiona was stable enough to move, Colt once again lifted her into his arms. The sun was beginning to set as they made their way to the boarding house, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Fiona had fallen into an exhausted doze against his chest, her breath warm against his neck. Colt found the sensation oddly comforting, though he could not have explained why. Martha Patterson met them at the door. Her wrinkled face creased with worry. "Lord have mercy," she exclaimed. "I heard there was shooting, but I had no idea our Miss Zimmerman was involved. Bring her up to her room, Mr. Rawlins, second door on the right at the top of the stairs." The boarding house was clean and well maintained, though the furniture was old and the wallpaper faded. Fiona's room was small but neat, with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, a washstand, and a small writing desk positioned near the window. Books were stacked everywhere, on every available surface. Colt recognized some of the titles as he laid her carefully on the bed: Shakespeare, Dickens, volumes of poetry, treatises on education theory. "She reads every night," Martha said softly, noticing his gaze. "Sometimes I see her light burning until nearly midnight. She is dedicated to improving her mind and her teaching." Colt helped remove Fiona's shoes and pulled the quilt over her. She stirred slightly but did not wake. In sleep, with the pain and determination gone from her face, she looked younger and more vulnerable. He felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness toward this strange Eastern woman who had thrown herself in front of a bullet for him. "I will come by tomorrow to check on her," Colt told Martha. "If anything changes tonight, if she develops a fever or the bleeding starts again, send someone to fetch me. I will be at the Silver Dollar." "You are a good man, Mr. Rawlins, Martha said, patting his arm. "Not many would take responsibility like this." Colt was not sure he agreed with that assessment, but he nodded and left before she could say more. As he walked through the darkening streets toward the saloon where he had originally been headed hours ago, he found his thoughts returning again and again to Fiona Zimmerman. She had been in Carson City for only 2 months, yet she had been willing to risk her life for a stranger. What kind of woman did that? And why did the thought of her lying alone in that small room, wounded because of him, create such an uncomfortable tightness in his chest? He had no answers, only questions, and the nagging certainty that his life had just become far more complicated than he had ever intended it to be. The Silver Dollar was already crowded when Colt finally arrived, but he managed to find a spot at the bar. The bartender, a burly man named Frank, who had been pouring drinks in Carson City longer than Colt had been alive, slid a beer across the polished wood without being asked. "Heard you had some excitement today," Frank said, his tone carefully neutral. "Word travels fast," Colt replied, taking a long drink. The beer was not as cold as he would have liked, but it washed away some of the dust in his throat. "Always does in a town this size. Jake Brennan is locked up in the jail. Sheriff says he will probably hang for attempted murder, especially since he tried to shoot you twice after missing the first time." Colt did not respond. He had no love for Jake Brennan, but the thought of any man hanging did not sit well with him. Still, Jake had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. "What I find interesting," Frank continued, wiping down the bar with a rag, "is that the prim little school teacher threw herself in front of you. Martha Patterson told my wife, who told me, that you carried Miss Zimmerman to Doc Henderson and then to the boarding house, that you are paying her medical costs and planning to look after her while she recovers." "She took a bullet meant for me," Colt said flatly. "What else would I do?" Frank shrugged. "Most men would have thanked her and moved on with their lives. You are doing considerably more than that." "Are you trying to make a point, Frank?" "Just making an observation. Miss Zimmerman is a good woman by all accounts, hardworking, dedicated to those children she teaches, but she is also very different from the women around here, educated, opinionated, not the type to defer to a man just because he is a man. And And I have known you for 7 years, Colt. You are a good rancher and a fair boss, but you have never shown interest in settling down with any woman. You have always been too focused on building your ranch, on proving you could make something of yourself out here. I just wonder what you were thinking, getting involved with someone like Fiona Zimmerman. Colt set down his beer with a thud. I am not getting involved with anyone. I am simply repaying a debt. Once she is healed, we will both go back to our separate lives. Frank held up his hands in a placating gesture. If you say so, but in my experience, nothing in life is ever that simple, especially not when it comes to matters between men and women. Colt did not dignify that with a response. He finished his beer, ordered another, and deliberately turned the conversation to cattle prices and weather conditions. But even as he talked business with Frank, and later with some other ranchers who wandered over, part of his mind remained on Fiona Zimmerman. He wondered if she was awake, if she was in pain, if Martha was capable of providing the care she needed. The wound had looked clean when Doc Henderson finished with it, but infection was always a risk with gunshot wounds. Colt had seen strong men die from infected wounds that had seemed minor at first. The thought of Fiona dying because she had saved his life was intolerable. After his second beer, Colt made a decision. He paid Frank, collected his horse from where he had left her tied outside, and walked back to the boarding house. Martha answered his knock, her eyebrows rising in surprise. "Mr. Rawlins, is something wrong?" "I want to check on Miss Zimmerman," Colt said. "Make sure she is resting comfortably." Martha hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and compassion. Finally, compassion won. "She woke about an hour ago. She is in considerable pain, but she refused the laudanum Doc Henderson left. Said she did not like how it made her mind feel foggy, stubborn girl." The last was said with a mixture of exasperation and fondness. "May I see her?" "It is not entirely proper, but given the circumstances, I suppose it would be acceptable. Just leave the door open, if you please." Fiona was sitting up in bed when Colt entered her room, propped against several pillows. She had changed out of the blood-stained blue dress and now wore a plain white nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her dark hair hung loose around her face, and in the lamplight Colt could see hints of red in the brown strands. She looked up as he entered, surprise flickering across her features. "Mr. Rawlins, I did not expect to see you again today." "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Colt said, feeling suddenly awkward in the small, intimate space of her bedroom. He remained near the door, his hat in his hands. "Martha said you are in pain." "I have been shot," Fiona said with a trace of dry humor. "Pain seems rather inevitable under the circumstances, but I will survive. Doc Henderson did excellent work." "You should take the laudanum. No sense suffering if you do not have to." Fiona shook her head firmly. "I despise how it makes me feel. As though I am floating somewhere outside my own body, disconnected from everything. I would rather endure the pain and keep my wits about me." Colt moved a little further into the room, noting the way she held herself carefully, how even the slight movement of speaking seemed to cause discomfort. "You are incredibly stubborn." "So I have been told." She studied him for a moment, her honey-colored eyes thoughtful. "Why did Jake Brennan want to kill you?" Colt sighed and moved to sit in the wooden chair near her desk, keeping a respectful distance from the bed. "I caught him stealing from the supply wagon about 6 months ago. Flour, sugar, coffee, anything he could sell in town for drinking money. I fired him on the spot and told him exactly why. Word got around, as it does. No one wanted to hire a known thief, especially one who stole from his employer. So he blamed you for his misfortune rather than accepting responsibility for his own actions." "Seems that way." "I heard he has been drinking heavily and making threats, but I did not think he would actually follow through. I should have been more careful." "You cannot live your life expecting violence at every turn," Fiona said. "That would be no life at all. Out here you have to stay alert. This land is not forgiving of carelessness or naivety." Fiona's expression turned thoughtful. "Is that what you think I am? Naive?" Colt considered his words carefully. "I think you are brave. Foolishly brave, perhaps, but brave nonetheless. What you did today? Throwing yourself in front of that bullet, that took courage, but it also took a lack of understanding of just how dangerous this place can be. If that bullet had been a few inches to the right, you would be dead. But it was not, Fiona said quietly, and you are alive. That matters to me. Why? The question came out more forcefully than Colt intended. You do not know me. We had never even met before today. Why would you risk your life for a stranger? Fiona was silent for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her hands where they rested on the quilt. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. Before I came west, I saw a man die in the street in Philadelphia. He was stabbed by a thief trying to steal his pocket watch. It happened in broad daylight on a busy street, and no one intervened. Everyone just stood there, myself included, too shocked or too frightened to move. By the time someone finally went for help, the man had bled to death. She looked up, meeting Colt's eyes. I promised myself that day that if I ever had the chance to save a life, I would not hesitate. I would not stand by and let someone die when I had the power to prevent it. So when I heard Jake Brennan shout your name and saw him raise that gun, I did not think. I just moved. Colt felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of some tight knot he had not known was there. You could have died, but I did not. We are both here, both alive. That is what matters. They sat in silence for a while. The only sound, the ticking of a clock somewhere in the boarding house, and the distant noise of the saloon down the street. Colt found himself studying Fiona's face, noting details he had been too preoccupied to see earlier, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the way lamplight caught on her hair, bringing out those hidden red highlights. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, not like the painted women who worked in the saloons or the carefully groomed daughters of wealthy ranchers. But there was something compelling about her features, something that drew his attention and held it. You should rest, Colt said, finally standing. Doc Henderson said you need to take it easy for the next week. A week is too long. The children need their lessons. The children will manage. You need to heal. He moved toward the door, then paused. I will come by tomorrow to check on you. Is there anything you need? Anything I can bring you? Fiona smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Thank you, but no. Martha has been very kind. She brought me soup earlier and promised to help me change the bandage in the morning. Colt nodded and turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the threshold. Mr. Rawlins, Colt, thank you for staying with me at the doctor's office today and for bringing me back here. You did not have to do that. You took a bullet for me, Colt said simply. I reckon that creates a certain obligation. As he walked back through the dark streets to the Silver Dollar to retrieve his horse, Colt found himself thinking about obligation and debt, and the strange woman who had entered his life in such a dramatic fashion. He told himself that his interest in her welfare was purely practical, a matter of honor and responsibility. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he was not quite ready to examine too closely, he suspected there was more to it than that. True to his word, Colt returned to the boarding house the next morning. He had spent the night in a rented room above the saloon, and despite the exhaustion from 3 weeks on the trail, he had slept poorly. His dreams had been filled with gunshots and honey-colored eyes and the feel of blood soaking through his shirt. Martha let him in with a knowing smile that made him vaguely uncomfortable. She is doing better this morning. The fever we were worried about never developed. She is a strong one, that girl. Fiona was out of bed when Colt entered her room, standing by the window and looking out at the street below. She had dressed in a simple gray dress that buttoned up the front, though he noticed she had left her wounded arm in a sling that Martha must have fashioned for her. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, and he saw that while she looked better than she had the previous evening, there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of a difficult night. You should not be out of bed, Colt said by way of greeting. Good morning to you as well, Fiona replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. I cannot simply lie in bed all day. I will go mad from boredom. Doc Henderson said I should not do anything strenuous. Standing by a window hardly qualifies. She moved slowly back toward the bed, though Colt noticed the slight wince she tried to hide as she sat down. Besides, I wanted to watch the town, to remind myself that life continues despite everything that happened yesterday. Colt crossed to the window and looked out. The street below was already busy despite the early hour. A freight wagon was being unloaded outside the general store. 2 women in their Sunday best were heading toward the church. A group of children played in the dust, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. "Some of those are my students," Fiona said, following his gaze. "The 2 girls with the blonde braids are the Miller sisters. The boy throwing rocks is Tommy Chen, whose parents run the laundry. The tall girl standing apart from the others is Sarah Blackthorne. She is 14 and brilliant, but her father does not see the point in educating girls beyond basic reading and writing." "You care about them," Colt observed. "Of course I do. That is why I am here. Education is the key to everything, to opportunity and understanding and growth. These children deserve the same quality of teaching that wealthy children in Boston or Philadelphia receive." "You really believe you can make a difference?" Fiona turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I have to believe it. Otherwise, what is the point of any of this? What is the point of leaving everything familiar and coming to a place where I am clearly an outsider, where people whisper about the strange Eastern woman and her peculiar ideas?" "They whisper about you?" Colt felt an unexpected flash of anger on her behalf. "Of course they do. I am a single woman living alone, pursuing a profession, expressing opinions. That makes people uncomfortable. The women think I am odd and possibly dangerous, a bad influence on their daughters. The men think I'm either pitiable or ridiculous, or both. But their children need education, and I am determined to provide it whether their parents approve of me or not." Colt found himself seeing Fiona Zimmerman in a new light. He had initially thought her foolish, a naive Easterner with romantic notions about the West. But there was nothing romantic or naive about the woman sitting before him. She knew exactly what she faced, the prejudice and skepticism, and she faced it anyway out of conviction and purpose. "I brought you something," Colt said, pulling a small package from his coat pocket. "It is not much, but I thought you might need it." Fiona unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a book. Her face lit up with genuine delight as she read the title. Wuthering Heights. "I have been wanting to read this for months, but I could not find a copy in any of the stores here." "I had to send to Sacramento for it," Colt admitted. "It arrived at the freight office last week. I bought it for, well, I am not sure why I bought it. I am not much of a reader, but when I saw it yesterday among my supplies, I thought of you and all these books in your room." "You had this before you even met me?" Fiona asked, surprise evident in her voice. Colt shifted uncomfortably. "I told you. I do not know why I bought it. Maybe I thought I should try to improve my mind or something foolish like that." "There is nothing foolish about wanting to read," Fiona said gently. She ran her hand over the cover of the book with something close to reverence. "This is incredibly thoughtful. Thank you." They talked for nearly an hour about books and education and life in Carson City. Colt found himself telling Fiona things he had never discussed with anyone. His frustration with some of the other ranchers who treated their workers poorly, his concerns about how long the good grazing land would last as more people moved into the territory, his half-formed dreams of someday breeding horses instead of just cattle. For her part, Fiona spoke about Philadelphia and her family, parents who had been supportive of her ambitions even when society frowned upon them. She told him about the teacher training she had undergone, the theories of education she found compelling, her belief that every child, regardless of gender or social status, deserved access to knowledge. "My father used to say that an educated populace is the foundation of democracy," Fiona said. "That if we truly want to build a fair and just society, we must ensure that everyone has the tools to participate fully in that society." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Colt said. "He was. He died 2 years ago. Heart failure. My mother followed 6 months later. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think she simply did not want to live without him." "I am sorry. Losing both parents so close together must have been devastating." Fiona's eyes grew distant. It was, but it also freed me in a way. With no family obligations to hold me, I could pursue what I truly wanted to do. I could come west and teach and make a difference. Perhaps that is a selfish way to view their deaths, but I like to think they would have understood. A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha entered carrying a tray laden with bread, cheese, and tea. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, setting it on the small desk. "Both of you. You need to keep your strength up, Miss Zimmerman. And Mr. Rawlins, when was the last time you had a proper meal?" Colt could not actually remember. He had eaten trail rations for 3 weeks and had been too preoccupied yesterday to think about food. His stomach growled in response to the sight of fresh bread betraying him. "There, you see," Martha said with satisfaction. "You are both going to sit here and eat every bite. Doctor's orders." She left before either could protest, closing the door but leaving it open a few inches for propriety's sake. Colt helped Fiona move from the bed to the chair near the desk, then pulled up the other chair. They ate together in comfortable silence, and Colt found himself thinking how strange this was. Sharing a meal with a woman he had only met the day before, in her bedroom no less. If anyone saw them like this, there would be talk. But somehow he could not bring himself to care. Over the next week, Colt fell into a routine. Each morning he would stop by the boarding house to check on Fiona's progress. He would help change her bandages, a task that required him to see her shoulder bare, skin pale, and marked with bruising around the healing wound. The first time they had both been acutely aware of the intimacy of the act. But necessity quickly bred familiarity, and soon it seemed natural for him to carefully clean the injury and apply fresh bandages while Fiona sat still and patient, her eyes fixed on the wall. In the afternoons, Colt would attend to business in town or ride out to his ranch to check on his foreman and the cattle. But he always returned in the evening bringing Fiona newspapers from Sacramento or books borrowed from the few literate ranchers he knew. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from practical matters like the best way to irrigate crops in Nevada's arid climate to philosophical questions about justice and morality and the nature of progress. Colt learned that Fiona had a sharp wit and a laugh that started low in her chest and bubbled up like spring water. He learned that she was passionate about causes she believed in and uncompromising in her principles. He learned that she could quote Shakespeare from memory and that she cried when reading particularly moving poetry. For her part, Fiona learned that beneath Colt's taciturn exterior was a thoughtful man who cared deeply about the people and land under his stewardship. She learned that he was scrupulously fair with his workers, paying them more than the going rate because he believed they deserved it. She learned that he had taught himself to read using his mother's old Bible and whatever newspapers he could get his hands on, and that he was quietly ashamed of the gaps in his education. "There is no shame in being self-taught," Fiona told him one evening as they sat in her room. The lamp turned low against the gathering darkness. "Some of the greatest minds in history were autodidacts. What matters is not how you acquired knowledge, but what you do with it." "Easy for you to say," Colt replied. "You have formal education, certificates, proof that you know what you're talking about. I have just picked up bits and pieces over the years." "And yet you built a successful ranch from nothing. You manage men and animals and business accounts. You understand weather patterns and animal husbandry and economics. Those are not small achievements." "It is different." "How?" Colt struggled to articulate the feeling. "When I talk to you, when you mention books or ideas or people from history, half the time I have no idea what you're referring to. It makes me feel ignorant." Fiona leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Then let me teach you, not in a formal way, but simply by sharing what I know. You have already taught me so much about this land and the people who live here. Let me return the favor." And so a new element was added to their evening conversations. Fiona would tell him about historical events or philosophical concepts, explaining them in ways that made them accessible and relevant to his life. She lent him books from her collection, and they would discuss them the next evening, Fiona drawing out his thoughts and opinions, never making him feel foolish when he misunderstood something or drew different conclusions than she would have. In turn, Colt taught her practical skills she would need to survive in Nevada. He showed her how to tell when a storm was coming by watching the behavior of animals and the color of the sky. He taught her which plants were edible and which were poisonous, which snakes to avoid and which were harmless. He explained the complex social dynamics of the ranching community, who could be trusted and who should be handled carefully. By the end of the week, Fiona's wound had healed enough for her to return to teaching. Colt accompanied her to the schoolhouse on her first day back, carrying her heavy bag of books and supplies. The building was small and spare, just one room with a wood stove, rows of rough benches, and a chalkboard at the front. But Fiona's face glowed with happiness as she arranged her materials and prepared for her students. "Thank you," she said to Colt as children began arriving, eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "For everything you have done this past week. I could not have managed without you." "You would have found a way," Colt said. "You're too stubborn not to." Fiona laughed, and the sound made something warm bloom in Colt's chest. "I suppose I am, but I am grateful nonetheless. For your help and for your company. You have made a difficult week much more bearable." Colt wanted to tell her that the feeling was mutual, that the hours he had spent with her had been the most enjoyable he could remember in years, but the words stuck in his throat, too vulnerable, too revealing. Instead, he simply tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Colt?" Fiona's voice stopped him at the door. "Will I see you again? I mean, now that I'm healed and back to work, will you still come by?" He turned to look at her, standing there in her prim schoolteacher dress with her arms still in a sling, surrounded by curious children. The morning light streaming through the windows caught in her hair, turning those red highlights to fire. She looked beautiful and brave and slightly uncertain, and Colt knew in that moment that he was in serious trouble. "If you want me to," he said carefully. Fiona's smile was answer enough. Over the following months, Colt found excuses to stay in Carson City more than he ever had before. His foreman, a capable man named Pete Douglas, who had been with him almost from the beginning, began to give him knowing looks whenever he announced he needed to go into town to check on supplies or meet with the banker or attend to any of a dozen other pieces of business that could easily have been handled by someone else. "You know," Pete said one afternoon as Colt saddled his horse for yet another trip to Carson City, "I have been working for you for 6 years, and I do not recall you ever being this concerned about town matters before." "The ranch needs supplies," Colt said, not meeting his foreman's eyes. "The ranch is fine. We have everything we need. But there is a certain school teacher in town who seems to require an awful lot of your attention lately." Colt shot Pete a warning look. "Watch yourself." Pete held up his hands, but he was grinning. "I am just saying, boss, if you are courting the woman, you should probably make your intentions clear. People are starting to talk." "I am not courting anyone. Miss Zimmerman and I are simply friends." "If you say so. But friends do not usually ride 15 miles 3 or 4 times a week just to have supper together. And they definitely do not look at each other the way you two do." "How do we look at each other?" Colt demanded, finally meeting Pete's eyes. "Like you are the only two people in the world," Pete said simply. "Like everyone else just fades away when you are together. That is not friendship, boss. That is something a whole lot more complicated." Colt rode toward Carson City with Pete's words echoing in his mind. Was he courting Fiona? He had never formally asked permission to call on her, never stated his intentions. They simply spent time together, talking and sharing meals and enjoying each other's company. But Pete was right that there was nothing simple about what he felt for her. Somewhere over the past months, Fiona Zimmerman had become the center of his world. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day, wondering what she was doing, whether her students were behaving, if she was happy. He looked forward to their evenings together with an anticipation that bordered on desperation. And when he was with her, when he could see her face and hear her voice and occasionally make her laugh, he felt more content than he had ever felt in his life. But contentment was not the only emotion Fiona inspired. There was also a growing desire that Colt tried hard to ignore. He found himself noticing the curve of her neck, the graceful movement of her hands, the way her eyes lit up when she was excited about something. He wondered what her hair would feel like loose and flowing through his fingers. He imagined what it would be like to kiss her, to pull her close, and Colt forcibly redirected his thoughts. Fiona was a respectable woman, a school teacher. She deserved to be treated with honor and propriety, not lusted after like one of the saloon girls. If he wanted more than friendship, he would need to court her properly the way she deserved. The question was whether she would want that. Whether a refined Eastern woman with her education and culture could ever truly be happy with a rough rancher who had calluses on his hands and dirt under his fingernails. Whether someone who had chosen to dedicate her life to teaching would want to give that up for marriage and children and the isolation of ranch life. He was still wrestling with these thoughts when he reached Carson City and made his way to the schoolhouse. Classes had ended for the day, but through the window he could see Fiona still inside, cleaning the chalkboard and organizing materials for the next day. He tied his horse and entered quietly, not wanting to startle her. Fiona turned at the sound of his footsteps, and her whole face brightened. "Colt, I did not expect you until tomorrow." "Finished my work early," he said, which was not exactly a lie. "Thought I would see if you wanted to take a walk before supper." "That sounds lovely. Just let me finish tidying up." Colt helped her put away books and sweep the floor, their movements comfortable and coordinated from long practice. Then they stepped out into the late afternoon sunshine and began walking toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. "How were your students today?" Colt asked. "Challenging," Fiona admitted. "Tommy Chen is brilliant at mathematics, but refuses to apply himself to reading. The Miller sisters are more interested in gossiping than learning. And Sarah Blackthorne barely speaks, though when I can draw her out, her insights are remarkable. The girl whose father does not value education? The same. I am trying to convince him to let her continue her studies, but he is adamant that she needs to focus on domestic skills to catch a husband, as if that is all a woman is good for." The frustration in Fiona's voice was clear. "Some men are set in their ways," Colt said carefully. "They cannot imagine a different world than the one they grew up in. Then they need to expand their imagination. The world is changing, Colt. Women are attending universities, entering professions, demanding the right to vote. That change is coming here too, whether men like Mr. Blackthorne approve or not." Colt found himself smiling at her passion. "You really believe that?" "I have to believe it. The alternative is to accept that half the population will always be constrained by arbitrary limitations based on nothing but their sex. That is intolerable." They had reached the outskirts of town, where the land stretched out in all directions, painted gold by the setting sun. Colt steered them toward a large rock outcropping that provided a good view of the valley. They climbed up and sat side by side, their shoulders nearly touching. "Can I ask you something?" Colt said, after a moment of comfortable silence. "Of course." "Do you ever regret coming here? Not the teaching itself, but leaving your life in Philadelphia. You had friends there, culture, everything you were accustomed to. Here you are isolated, treated as an outsider, working yourself to exhaustion for children whose parents sometimes resent your very presence." Fiona was quiet for a long moment, her gaze on the distant mountains. "Sometimes," she admitted. "There are days when I miss the things I had in Philadelphia. The theater, the museums, conversations with other educated women, the ease of being in a place where I understood all the unspoken rules and expectations. But then I think about what I am building here, the difference I am making in these children's lives, and I know I made the right choice." She turned to look at him, and the intensity in her eyes made his breath catch. "Besides, I have found things here I never had in Philadelphia. A sense of purpose that goes beyond just doing work I enjoy. Connections with people that feel real and deep rather than superficial. Friendship that matters." "Is that what we have?" Colt asked quietly. "Friendship?" Fiona held his gaze, and he saw uncertainty flicker across her face. "I thought so, at least at first, but lately I have been wondering if it might be something more." Colt's heart was pounding hard enough that he was certain she could hear it. "Fiona, I need to know. If I were to court you properly to declare my intentions, would that be welcome? Because I do not want to presume, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable. But Pete was right when he said people are starting to talk, and maybe they are talking because there is something to talk about. Pete said that? A smile tugged at Fiona's lips. He said a lot of things, most of which I probably should not repeat, but the core of it was that I need to be honest about what I want, and what I want is you, Fiona. Not just your friendship, though I value that more than I can say, but more. I want the right to call you mine, to court you publicly, to see where this feeling between us might lead. Fiona reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. The gesture was both innocent and intimate, sending warmth spreading through his entire body. I want that too, she said softly. I have wanted it for weeks now, but I was not sure if you felt the same. You are always so controlled, so careful. I could not read whether your attentiveness was just kindness and obligation or something deeper. It is deeper, Colt said, his voice rough. So much deeper that it scares me sometimes. I did not expect this, Fiona. You were the last person I expected to fall in love with. A city woman, educated and refined, with a life and purpose of your own. It makes no sense that you would want anything to do with a rough rancher like me. You are not just a rancher, Fiona said fiercely. You are intelligent and thoughtful and kind. You have taught me more about strength and resilience than any book ever could. You see me as a person, not just as a woman or a teacher or any other label. You challenge me to think differently, and you listen when I speak. Why would I not want that? Colt raised his free hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. There are practical considerations. If we pursue this, if we marry, people will expect you to give up teaching. They will expect you to move out to the ranch, to focus on being a wife and eventually a mother. I do not know if I can ask you to sacrifice everything you have worked for. Then do not ask me to sacrifice it, Fiona said simply. Ask me to build something new that incorporates both our dreams. Maybe I cannot teach in the town school if we marry, but maybe I can teach the children of the ranch families, the ones who are too far out to come to town regularly. Maybe I can advocate for better schools throughout the territory. Maybe being your wife does not have to mean giving up who I am. Hope flared bright in Colt's chest. You have thought about this, about us. Of course I have. Have you not? Only constantly. Fiona laughed, that wonderful bubbling sound he had come to love. Then I suppose we are courting now, officially? I suppose we are, Colt agreed. And then, because he could not help himself any longer, he leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other's lips. But then Fiona made a small sound of pleasure and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and urgent. Colt pulled her tight against him, one hand tangled in her hair, the other splayed across her back. She tasted like tea and something indefinably sweet, and he felt like he could drown in the sensation and die happy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fiona's eyes were dark with desire and her lips were swollen from kissing. She looked thoroughly disheveled and absolutely beautiful. That was, she began, then seemed to lose her words. Yeah, Colt agreed, his voice hoarse. It was. They sat together as the sun finished setting, Fiona tucked against Colt's side, his arm around her shoulders. Neither spoke, but the silence was comfortable, full of promise rather than uncertainty. Colt felt like his entire world had shifted on its axis, like everything before this moment had been preparation for being here with this woman in his arms. Eventually, they had to return to town. Colt walked Fiona back to the boarding house, properly keeping a respectable distance between them now that they were in public view. But at the door, he caught her hand and brought it to his lips. Tomorrow, he asked. Tomorrow, Fiona confirmed, her smile radiant. As Colt rode back to his ranch that night, the stars bright overhead and the air cooling rapidly with the desert night, he found himself thinking about the future in ways he never had before. For years, his focus had been entirely on building his ranch, on proving he could succeed where his father had struggled. Romance and marriage had seemed like distractions, complications he did not need, but Fiona had changed everything. She had shown him that there was more to life than work and survival, that connection and love were not weaknesses but sources of strength. She challenged him to be better, to think more deeply, to want more from life than just material success. The next months passed in a blur of happiness. Colt courted Fiona with a single-minded determination that amused his ranch hands and scandalized some of the more conservative town residents. He brought her wildflowers picked from the high meadows. He took her on long rides through the countryside, showing her the land he loved and teaching her to ride better so she could keep up with him. He sat through school programs and recitals, beaming with pride at her accomplishments. Fiona blossomed under his attention. The wary reserve she had maintained with most people fell away when she was with Colt, revealing a playful, passionate woman who laughed easily and loved fiercely. She introduced Colt to her students, and he became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, occasionally giving talks about ranching or bringing in young animals for the children to see and learn about. The town gradually accepted their courtship, though there were always a few who whispered that a school teacher ought to set a better example or that an educated woman would never be happy with a simple rancher. But most people saw how happy Colt and Fiona were together and wished them well. 6 months after that first kiss on the rock outcropping, Colt proposed. He did it simply, without grand gestures or elaborate planning. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house after supper, watching the sun set over the mountains, and the words just came. "Marry me," he said, turning to look at her. "I know it is not a glamorous life I'm offering you. The ranch is isolated and the work is hard, and there will be difficult times. But I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Fiona's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Yes, of course I will marry you." Colt pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had cost him most of his savings. He slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I spoke to the territorial superintendent about the possibility of starting a school out here," Colt said, "for the ranch children who cannot make it to town regularly. He seemed interested in the idea, especially since you would be the teacher. It would not pay much, but it would let you keep teaching after we marry." Fiona threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him off the porch bench. "You did that for me?" "I did it for us," Colt said, holding her close, "because I want you to be happy, and I know teaching is part of who you are. I would never ask you to give that up." They were married 2 months later in a simple ceremony at the church in Carson City. Fiona wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Colt wore his best suit, newly purchased from the general store and still smelling faintly of camphor. Pete Douglas stood up as his best man, and Martha Patterson stood with Fiona, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief throughout the ceremony. The church was packed with people, far more than Colt had expected. All his ranch hands had come, scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday clothes. Fiona's students filled the first 3 pews, their faces shining with excitement. Ranchers and their families from throughout the region had made the journey to attend. Even some of the town women who had initially been skeptical of Fiona were there, won over by her dedication to their children's education. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Colt kissed Fiona with a tenderness that made several of the ladies sigh. And when they walked back down the aisle together, hands clasped, the congregation burst into applause. The reception was held at the Silver Dollar, which Frank had closed to his usual customers for the occasion. There was food and music and dancing, and Colt found himself swept into the celebration despite his usual preference for quiet. But watching Fiona laugh and dance with the children from her school, seeing how happy she was, made every awkward social moment worthwhile. Late in the evening, after they had cut the cake and opened presents and thanked everyone multiple times, Colt and Fiona slipped away. They rode out to the ranch under a sky blazing with stars, and Colt carried his bride over the threshold of the house he had built with his own hands. Their wedding night was tender and passionate by turns, both of them nervous and eager, fumbling their way through intimacy with laughter and whispered endearments. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Fiona traced patterns on Colt's chest with her fingertips. "I never imagined this," she said softly. "When I came to Carson City, I thought I would dedicate my life to teaching, and that would be enough. I never imagined falling in love like this." "Neither did I," Colt admitted. "You were the last person I expected to love, but I love you more than I expected was even possible." Fiona propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her hair falling around them like a curtain. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that we will always be honest with each other, that we will always talk through our problems rather than letting them fester, that we will face whatever comes together, as partners." "I promise," Colt said solemnly. "You have my word, Fiona. Whatever life brings, we face it together." They sealed the promise with a kiss, and then with more than a kiss, and the night stretched out before them full of promise and possibility. The first year of their marriage brought adjustments for both of them. Fiona had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, which were dictated by weather and animals rather than a school schedule. She learned to cook for a dozen hungry ranch hands, to preserve food for the winter, to manage a household in an isolated location where running to the store for forgotten items was not an option. But she also thrived in ways she had not expected. She started the school for ranch children just as Colt had promised, holding classes 3 times a week in the ranch house parlor. The children came from miles around hungry for learning, and Fiona threw herself into teaching them with renewed passion. She also began writing articles about education in the territories, which were published in newspapers as far away as San Francisco and Denver, bringing attention to the need for more schools and better funding. For his part, Colt had to learn to share his life and his space, to consider someone else's needs and preferences alongside his own. It was not always easy. He was used to making decisions independently, to structuring his days entirely around ranch work, but he found that having Fiona as a partner made him better at everything. She helped him with the business side of ranching, keeping detailed accounts and spotting patterns in expenses that he had missed. She served as an informal diplomat when dealing with difficult neighbors or disagreements among the ranch hands, and she brought joy and laughter into spaces that had been purely functional before. Their second year brought challenges. A harsh winter killed off a quarter of Colt's herd, putting them in financial difficulty. They had to make hard choices about which investments to postpone, which improvements to the ranch to delay. There were nights when Colt lay awake worrying about money, about whether he could provide for Fiona the way she deserved. But Fiona never complained. She cut back on household expenses, found creative ways to stretch their food supplies, and even took on some tutoring of wealthy ranchers' children in town to bring in additional income. Through it all, she remained optimistic and supportive, reminding Colt that they had survived worse and would survive this too. "We have each other," she said one particularly difficult evening when they had just learned that cattle prices had dropped again. "That is worth more than any amount of money." Colt pulled her into his arms, grateful beyond words for her steadiness and strength. "I do not deserve you," he said into her hair. "Nonsense. We deserve each other. That is how love works." Spring brought relief in the form of healthy calves and better weather. By summer, they had recovered most of their losses and were beginning to plan for the future again. And in the fall, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Colt one evening after supper, her hands resting on her still flat stomach, her expression a mixture of joy and nervousness. "I am going to have a baby. Our baby." Colt felt like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. A baby. He was going to be a father. The magnitude of it was overwhelming, terrifying, and absolutely wonderful all at once. "Are you happy?" Fiona asked, watching his face anxiously. "We had not really talked about children yet, and I know the timing is not ideal financially, but—" Colt cut off her words with a kiss. "I am happy," he said when he could speak again. Happier than I have words for. A baby, Fiona. We are going to have a baby. The pregnancy was difficult. Fiona suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon for the first few months. She was exhausted all the time, struggling to keep up with her teaching and household duties. Colt tried to help as much as he could, taking over more of the household chores and reducing the number of students she was trying to teach at once. As her belly grew round with their child, Colt found himself marveling at the changes in her body, at the miracle of life growing inside her. He would lie with his hand on her stomach at night, feeling the baby kick and squirm, overwhelmed by the reality of impending fatherhood. "What if I'm not good at this?" he asked one night as they lay in the darkness. "What if I fail our child the way my father failed me?" "Your father did not fail you," Fiona said gently. "He died, which is tragic, but not a failure. And you will not fail our child because you are already thinking about how to be a good parent. That is half the battle right there. I want to give our children everything: education, opportunity, the chance to become whoever they want to be." "Our children will have all of that and more," Fiona assured him. "They will have parents who love them and each other. That is the most important thing." Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1881, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours and left Fiona exhausted but triumphant. Colt had stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and letting her squeeze hard enough to leave bruises when the contractions came. When the baby finally emerged, wailing lustily, Colt felt tears streaming down his face. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squirming, blood-covered infant on Fiona's chest. "A healthy boy." Fiona looked down at their son with such pure love that Colt's heart felt like it might burst. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." They named him James, after Fiona's father. He had Colt's dark hair and Fiona's honey-colored eyes, and from the start he was determined and strong-willed, refusing to sleep when he thought he should be awake and protesting loudly anytime his needs were not immediately met. Fatherhood transformed Colt in ways he had not anticipated. The fierce protectiveness he felt for this tiny person was overwhelming. He found himself unable to sleep some nights, too busy watching James breathe to close his own eyes. He rearranged his work schedule around the baby's needs, making sure he was always there to help Fiona with the exhausting work of caring for a newborn. Fiona had to give up her formal teaching for a while, but she did not seem to mind. She was completely absorbed in James, marveling at every tiny developmental milestone, every new sound or movement. But Colt could also see how tired she was, how the constant demands of caring for an infant wore her down. "You should rest," he told her one afternoon when he found her trying to wash dishes while James fussed in his cradle. "I can handle this." "You have ranch work to do," Fiona protested, but her voice was weak with exhaustion. "The ranch can wait. You cannot." Colt took the dishes from her hands and steered her toward the bedroom. "Go lie down. I will watch James and have supper ready when you wake up." Fiona looked like she wanted to argue, but another cry from James made her wince. "Just for an hour," she agreed. She slept for 3 hours, and when she woke, Colt had managed to calm James, wash the dishes, prepare a simple meal, and even get some paperwork done. He had also gained a new appreciation for just how much work Fiona did every single day. Over the next months, they settled into a new rhythm. Colt took on more of the child care than most fathers would have, but he did not care what people thought. This was his son, his family, and he would do whatever was necessary to support them. As James grew from an infant into a toddler, his personality emerged more fully. He was curious about everything, constantly getting into things he should not touch. He adored animals, squealing with delight whenever Colt brought him to see the horses or cattle, and he clearly adored both his parents, his face lighting up whenever either of them entered the room. When James was 2, Fiona became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to continue teaching her small school throughout most of it. Their daughter, Catherine, was born on a cold December morning, during a winter storm that trapped them all inside for 3 days. Catherine was quieter than James had been, more observant. She had Fiona's dark hair and Colt's facial features, and from the start she seemed to study the world around her with serious interest. James was fascinated by his little sister, though he had to be constantly reminded to be gentle with her. With 2 children now, life became even more chaotic. But it was a good chaos, full of laughter and love, and the constant wonder of watching their children grow and develop. Colt would sometimes look at his family gathered around the dinner table and feel overwhelmed by gratitude. This life, these people, were more than he had ever dreamed of having. The years passed in a steady progression of seasons and milestones. James learned to ride almost before he could walk, developing a natural affinity for horses that made Colt beam with pride. Catherine turned out to have her mother's love of books and learning, sitting quietly for hours with a picture book even before she could read the words. Fiona slowly returned to more formal teaching, though she kept her class sizes smaller than before to allow time for her own children. She continued writing articles about education and became a vocal advocate for women's rights, including the right to vote. Some people in Carson City found her opinions scandalous, but many more respected her intelligence and conviction. Colt expanded his ranching operation, buying additional land and diversifying into horse breeding as he had always wanted to do. He developed a reputation for being a fair and honest businessman, and for breeding some of the finest horses in the territory. Young men came from throughout the region hoping to learn from him, and he took on several apprentices over the years, teaching them not just about ranching, but about integrity and responsibility. Their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas, arrived when James was 7 and Catherine was 5. Thomas was a happy, easygoing baby who seemed to roll with whatever chaos swirled around him. He became the family peacemaker, always able to make people laugh when tensions ran high. As the children grew, Colt and Fiona made good on their promise to give them every opportunity. All 3 learned to read at young ages, devouring the ever-growing collection of books in the ranch house. They studied mathematics and history and literature with their mother. They learned ranching and riding and survival skills from their father, and they grew up understanding that both education and practical skills were valuable, that a person could be both thoughtful and capable. James, when he was 14, announced his intention to become a veterinarian. "I want to help animals, Schreier," he said seriously. "Not just ranch animals, but all animals. There are so few doctors for animals in the territories, and they are needed." Colt felt a swell of pride at his son's ambition. "That will require years of study. Probably going back east for university." "I know, but you and Mother always said we should pursue what we are passionate about. I am passionate about this." "Then we will find a way to make it happen," Colt promised. Catherine at 12 showed every sign of following in her mother's footsteps as a teacher. She was patient with younger children and had a gift for explaining complex ideas in simple ways. She also had her mother's strong sense of justice and frequently championed the underdog, whether it was a student being bullied or a cause she believed in. Thomas, still young at 9, seemed content to remain on the ranch. He loved the land and the animals and the physical work in a way that reminded Colt of himself at that age. "This is where I belong," Thomas would say with simple certainty. "I cannot imagine being anywhere else." As Colt approached his 50th birthday, he found himself reflecting on the unexpected path his life had taken. If someone had told him 20 years ago that he would be happily married with 3 children, that a city-bred school teacher would become the center of his world, he would have laughed in disbelief. He had expected to spend his life alone, focused solely on building his ranch, never imagining that love and family could bring such profound fulfillment. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Colt and Fiona sat together on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. Fiona's hair was threaded with silver now, and lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes. But to Colt, she was as beautiful as the day he had first carried her to Doc Henderson's office with a bullet in her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" Colt asked, taking her hand. "Marrying me, coming to live out here, giving up the life you could have had in a city somewhere?" Fiona turned to look at him, her honey-colored eyes clear and steady. Never. Not for a single moment. This life we have built together, this family, is more than I ever dreamed of when I came to Carson City all those years ago. You could have married someone with more education, someone who could have given you an easier life. I did not want an easier life. I wanted a meaningful one. And that is exactly what I have with you. She squeezed his hand. Do you regret it? Taking on a stubborn Eastern woman and all her peculiar ideas? Colt laughed. You were the last person I expected to love. But I love you more than I expected was even possible. That has never changed, and it never will. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. In the distance, an owl hooted. From inside the house came the faint sound of Thomas's laughter as he read in bed by lamplight, despite being told to go to sleep. We should probably make him put out that light, Fiona said, but she made no move to get up. In a minute, Colt agreed. Let him enjoy his book a little longer. As the night deepened around them, Colt thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The gunshot that had brought them together. The months of friendship that had grown into love. The wedding, the children, the struggles and triumphs of building a life together. Every moment had been worth it, even the difficult ones, because they had all led here, to this deep contentment and abiding love. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and challenges. James left for veterinary school when he was 18, heading back east to Philadelphia, where Fiona's old connections helped him gain admission to a prestigious program. It was hard watching their oldest child leave, but they were proud of his determination to pursue his dreams. Catherine, at 16, was already helping her mother teach and showing remarkable skill at it. She had also developed a passionate interest in women's suffrage and regularly corresponded with activists throughout the country. Colt was sometimes alarmed by her radical ideas, but Fiona encouraged her daughter's political awakening with pride. Thomas, at 13, was exactly where he wanted to be, working alongside his father every day and learning the intricacies of ranching. He had a natural gift for it, able to read the weather and the land in ways that took most men decades to develop. Colt and Fiona had grown older together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They still made time for each other, still took rides together through the countryside, still stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. The passion of their early years had evolved into something steadier, but no less powerful. A love that was woven into every aspect of their daily lives. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Colt surprised Fiona by taking her back to the rock outcropping where he had first kissed her. It took some planning to get away from the ranch and the children, but Pete Douglas, still faithfully serving as foreman, assured him everything would be fine for one evening. They rode out in the late afternoon, and Colt spread a blanket on the same spot where they had sat all those years ago. He had packed a picnic supper, and they ate as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Do you remember the first time we came here? Colt asked. How could I forget? It was the night you first kissed me, the night everything changed. I was terrified, Colt admitted. Terrified that I was misreading the situation, that you would reject me, that I was about to ruin the best friendship I had ever had. I was terrified too. I'd never felt anything like what I felt for you. It was overwhelming and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. Colt pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to Fiona. Open it. Inside was a gold locket on a delicate chain. Fiona opened it to find 2 tiny photographs inside, one of each of them from their wedding day. So you can carry that day with you always, Colt said softly. The day we promised to face everything together as partners. That promise has been the foundation of everything good in my life. Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks as she fastened the locket around her neck. I love you, she said simply, more with every year that passes. You are my heart, Colt Rawlins. And you are mine, Fiona Rawlins, always and forever. They stayed on the outcropping until full dark, wrapped in each other's arms under the stars. And when they finally rode back to the ranch, They did so side by side, as they had done everything for the past 25 years. Time moved forward, as it always does. James finished his veterinary training and returned to Nevada, setting up a practice in Carson City. He married a local girl, a rancher's daughter who shared his love of animals, and they gave Colt and Fiona their first grandchild, a granddaughter named Emma. Catherine followed her mother's path into teaching, but took it further, eventually opening a school for girls in Sacramento that focused on both traditional academics and practical life skills. She never married, declaring that her students were her life's work and her family. She also became a prominent voice in the women's suffrage movement, speaking at rallies and writing passionate articles about equality and justice. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations as Colt aged, eventually becoming a full partner in the enterprise. He married at 25, bringing a wonderful woman named Alice into the family. They had 4 children who filled the ranch house with noise and laughter, reminding Colt of when his own children had been small. As Colt entered his 60s, his body began showing the effects of decades of hard physical labor. His joints ached on cold mornings, and he could not work the long hours he once had, but he did not mind. He had Thomas to handle the demanding work, and he was content to take on a more advisory role, sharing his knowledge and experience with his son and the younger ranch hands. Fiona's health remained good, though she too slowed down with age. She still taught a small class of children, still wrote her articles, still advocated tirelessly for education and women's rights. But she spent more time with her grandchildren now, reading to them and teaching them in the gentle, patient way that had made her such a beloved teacher throughout her career. On quiet evenings, Colt and Fiona would sit together on their porch, watching the sun set over land that Colt had worked for over 40 years. They would hold hands and talk about their children and grandchildren, about memories and dreams, about the life they had built together from nothing but love and determination. "We did well, did we not?" Fiona said one evening, her voice soft with contentment. "We did more than well," Colt replied. "We built something lasting, a family, a legacy, children and grandchildren who will carry forward what we taught them about integrity and compassion and hard work. I am so proud of them, of all of them." James is saving animals and training the next generation of veterinarians. Catherine is changing minds and opening doors for young women. Thomas is not only maintaining the ranch, but improving it, expanding it in ways we never imagined. They became exactly who they were meant to be. "Because they had you as their mother, boss," Colt said firmly. "You showed them that education and conviction matter, that standing up for what is right is worth the cost, that love and dedication can overcome any obstacle." "We showed them that together," Fiona corrected gently. "You taught them just as much as I did. You taught them about responsibility and resilience and the value of honest work. You taught them to care for the land and the animals under their stewardship. You taught them to be good people." Colt pulled Fiona closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They sat like that as darkness fell, 2 people who had loved each other through good times and bad, through joy and sorrow, through all the challenges and triumphs of building a life together. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management. He proved to have his father's work ethic and his mother's innovation, implementing new techniques and expanding into additional ventures. The school that Fiona had started decades ago had grown into a permanent institution, now run by a young teacher who had been one of Fiona's first students in Carson City. As Colt's 70th birthday approached, the family planned a large celebration. Children and grandchildren gathered from across the state and beyond. James came from Carson City with his growing family. Catherine arrived from Sacramento with several of her former students, now young women pursuing their own careers and education. Thomas's children, ranging in age from 5 to 15, ran wild through the ranch, their laughter echoing across the land. The celebration was held on a beautiful June day with long tables set up outside the ranch house and food enough to feed an army. Friends and neighbors from throughout the region came to honor Colt and to celebrate the life he had built. There were speeches and toasts, stories and laughter, music and dancing that continued long into the night. At one point, Colt found himself standing alone for a moment, watching his family and friends gathered together. He felt Fiona slip her hand into his and he turned to smile at her. "This is everything," he said simply. "Everything I never knew I wanted, everything I'm grateful for every single day." "We have been blessed," Fiona agreed. "So incredibly blessed. Not just with material success, but with love and family and purpose. What more could anyone ask for?" "Nothing," Colt said, pulling her into his arms for a slow dance to the music drifting from the party. "There is nothing more I could possibly want. You gave me everything, Fiona. When you threw yourself in front of that bullet all those years ago, you gave me my life, and then you filled that life with more love and joy than I ever deserved." "You deserved all of it and more," Fiona said fiercely. "You are a good man, Colt Rawlins, the best man I have ever known, and I would do it all over again in a heartbeat." They danced together under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved and the land they had worked so hard to build a life on. And Colt thought about how strange and wonderful life was, how a single moment could change everything, how the last person you expected to love could become the person you could not imagine living without. The years that followed were gentle. Colt and Fiona both slowed down considerably, their bodies finally succumbing to age, but their minds remained sharp, and their love remained constant. They spent their days quietly reading together, talking with grandchildren, watching the ranch continue to grow and prosper under Thomas's leadership. Fiona celebrated her 70th birthday surrounded by her family, looking frail but happy. Catherine had organized a special surprise, bringing together women from across the state who had been inspired by Fiona's advocacy and teaching. They presented her with a leather-bound book filled with letters and testimonials about how she had changed their lives and opened doors that had previously been closed to women. Fiona wept as she read through the letters, overwhelmed by the evidence that her life had mattered, that her work had made a real difference. "I never imagined," she whispered to Colt that night as they lay in bed. "I never imagined that one person could touch so many lives." "You did more than touch them," Colt said. "You transformed them. You showed them what was possible. That is an incredible legacy, Fiona." As they entered their 8th decade of life, Colt and Fiona both understood that their time was growing short. They did not speak of it directly, but there was a bittersweetness to their interactions, a sense of treasuring each moment because they knew there would not be infinitely many more. On a warm September evening, nearly 5 decades after that fateful gunshot in Carson City, Colt and Fiona sat together on their porch one last time. The sun was setting in a blaze of gold and crimson, painting the mountains in shades of purple and blue. Fiona was wrapped in a quilt despite the warmth, her body finally failing after so many years of strength. "Do you remember that day?" Fiona asked softly. "The day we met?" "Every detail," Colt replied, his hand clasped tightly around hers. "The sound of the gunshot, the way you came out of nowhere and threw yourself in front of me, the weight of you in my arms as I carried you to Doc Henderson, your eyes so fierce despite the pain." "I knew then," Fiona said. "Even in that moment, something in me recognized you, recognized that you were going to be important to me." "I knew nothing," Colt admitted. "I thought you were foolish and brave and completely incomprehensible. I certainly did not expect to fall in love with you. You were the last person I expected to love." "But you did love me. You loved me more than I ever expected was possible." "I still do. That has never changed. Not for a single day in all these years." Fiona turned her head to look at him, and even weakened by age and illness, her honey-colored eyes still held that same fierce determination he had fallen in love with. "Promise me something, Colt. Anything. Promise me you will not mourn for too long, that you will celebrate what we had rather than grieving what is lost. We had 50 beautiful years together. That is more than most people ever get. Be grateful for that." Colt felt tears sliding down his weathered cheeks. "I cannot promise not to grieve. Losing you will break something in me that I do not think can be fixed." "Then promise me you will let our children and grandchildren help you carry that grief, that you will not shut yourself away, that you will keep living, keep loving, keep being part of this family we built together." "That I can promise," Colt said, his voice rough with emotion. "For you, I promise." Fiona smiled, and it was the same radiant smile that had transformed her face on their wedding day. "Good. That is all I need to hear." They sat together as the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared. Fiona's breathing grew slower, shallower, but she seemed at peace. When she finally slipped away, it was so gentle that Colt almost did not realize it had happened. One moment she was there, her hand warm in his. The next, she was gone. Colt sat holding her hand for a long time, tears streaming down his face, his heart breaking and whole at the same time, broken because he had lost the love of his life, the woman who had been his partner in everything for 50 years, whole because of the incredible gift she had given him, the life they had built together, the love that would sustain him through this loss and whatever came after. Thomas found him there eventually and gently helped him into the house. The family gathered, weeping together, supporting each other through the grief. They buried Fiona on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree that she had loved. Hundreds of people came to her funeral, testament to the lives she had touched through her teaching and advocacy and simple kindness. In the months that followed, Colt felt Fiona's absence like a physical pain. The house seemed too quiet without her voice. The bed seemed too large without her presence. The future seemed too empty without her hand in his. But he kept his promise. He let his children and grandchildren surround him with love and support. He told them stories about their grandmother, keeping her memory alive and vibrant. He watched with pride as they continued the work she had started, teaching and advocating and making the world a better place. And sometimes on quiet evenings, Colt would sit alone on the porch and feel Fiona's presence beside him. Not a ghost, but a memory so vivid and so precious that it was almost like having her there. He would remember that fateful day when a gunshot had brought them together, when she had thrown herself in front of a bullet and changed both their lives forever. He would remember the way she had looked at him, the way she had loved him, the way she had built a life beside him that exceeded anything he had ever dreamed possible. Colt lived for 3 more years after Fiona's death, years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the ongoing work of the ranch, with the satisfaction of seeing his children thrive and succeed. And when his own time came, on a clear spring morning with the smell of wildflowers drifting through the open window, he went peacefully, knowing that he would see Fiona again. They were buried side by side on that hill under the oak tree, their headstones simple but elegant. The inscription spoke of lives well lived, of love that had endured, of a partnership that had created something lasting and meaningful. And their descendants, generation after generation, would visit that hill and tell the story of how a cowboy and a school teacher had met through violence and built something beautiful through love, proving that sometimes the last person you expect to love is the person you end up loving more than you ever thought possible.